in April, a writer called Damien Barr wrote on Twitter, "We are not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm." We are not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm. This caused quite a storm. He was commenting on the idea, the mistaken idea, that the current crisis, this global pandemic, the coronavirus crisis, is indiscriminate, and so it affects everyone, no matter who they are, in the same way, which is false. The truth is, despite the fact that we globally, brothers and sisters across the world, face a still accelerating global pandemic, we don't face it in the same way. We're in different situations, and it is far more severe in its effects in areas of poverty, of vulnerability, in particular groups of people across the world. Despite the fact we face the same storm, it seems our boats are different in the way that they shield and they shelter and they protect us. It is difficult to feel safe and secure in the face of pressure, in the face of a storm. We are together looking at a letter that was written to people under pressure, people facing a storm. It's a letter that's called The Revelation. It comes right at the end of this collection of books we call the Bible. It's written by a man who calls himself John, and who is writing to encourage those under pressure. He's writing to 7 groups of Jesus followers, he says, in a particular area, an area we now know as Central Turkey, but originally was Asia Minor. And he's writing to encourage them because they are trying to live out a way, a movement, a project based on the life and the death and the resurrection of a man called Jesus of Nazareth, who lived and died and was raised from the dead, his followers believe, around 60 years before this letter was written. At the part we're at in the story today, there is a message, and this message doesn't come from John, it comes from a vision, a revealing that John has of the risen, living Jesus. And he has a specific message for different groups of Jesus followers in different places. And this one is for a place that was known as Philadelphia. Philadelphia in the first century, the name means brotherly love, was famous or notorious for a couple of different things. It was a city that had actually been built on a fault line. This is a region known for volcanoes and earthquakes. And in particular, Philadelphia had been hit, the whole region had been hit actually, by a huge earthquake in around about AD 17. And Philadelphia was notoriously completely destroyed. It was then rebuilt, but it was only able to be rebuilt because the Roman Empire of the time gave them a grant or some tax relief on the payments they were due to the empire, which allowed them to rebuild. And in gratitude, they renamed themselves Neo-Caesarea to kind of bow down to the emperor. Later on, another emperor would actually ask them to change their name again, and neither name stuck in the end. The Jesus in this vision introduces himself to them by saying that he is the one who's holy and true. These are the words of him who is holy and true. In their Jewish story, in their Jewish identity, and so many of them listening to this letter being read out in Philadelphia would be Jewish. They would know that there's only one person in their stories, in their collection of scriptures, who describes himself as holy and true. We tend to think of the word holy meaning religious or spiritual, but the word itself means distinct, distinctive, set apart. And the only person in the Jewish story who describes himself as holy and true is God himself. In their scriptures, in their Torah, the core of their scriptures, he describes himself in a book called Leviticus as holy, distinct, and it's that reason that he asks them as they live out what he's telling them to do, that they are also distinct, that they are holy. I am holy, so be holy, he says. What John is telling us is that these words from Jesus are the words not just of Jesus, but of the living God himself, their God. The God of creation, the God who rescued them from slavery, the God who made them a people to be part of what he's doing in the world. Jesus then also refers to the key of David. And again, the imaginations of the Jewish listeners would be sparked by a reminder of a great message of hope in a book called Isaiah. And in there, Isaiah talks of a man called Eliakim, who was given the keys of the house of David. He was given the same privileges and opportunities and responsibility as the King David himself, almost. And Jesus is expanding on this by saying he has this kind of authority, the keys of David, the kind of keys that can open doors and shut doors, and no one can open or shut them again. When he talks about an open door, he talks about an opportunity. Jesus goes on to say two really comforting words to hear in a storm, in a crisis. He says, I know. He repeats it. He says, I know. I know what you're going through. I understand, not because I'm far away, but because I am here with you. And I know what you have done. He says, I know that I've given you an open door. I've given you an opportunity to play your part, to be part of what I'm doing in the world. And you've taken that. And despite the fact you think that you're insignificant and that you think you're small in number and you don't have much effect, yet you've hung on. You've kept my word, which means you've lived out my way. And you've not let yourself be pushed in by the pressure, by the empire to become like everyone else and be ineffective. He says, I know. It turns out the storm that's facing these followers isn't just the storm of the pressure to be part, to buy into the empire around them. It's more particular in that. And there seems to have been a group, and we don't know too much about them, who have actively campaigned against this group of Jesus followers. Jesus, in this vision, sarcastically calls them a synagogue of Satan. Now, it seems that they were people who described themselves as Jews, but they weren't Jews. They were fake Jews. They were liars pretending to be Jews. A synagogue of Satan means people pretending to be holy and religious, but actually working against what God is doing. Satan, the word means the accuser, the enemy. It seems that maybe they had been excluding these Jesus followers from the social life or the economic life, or maybe actively trying to get their movement shut down. Whatever the reason, Jesus says that they are liars and that they will come and fall down at their feet. Now we might jump here and think this means that they'll be humiliated in the future, but that's not the sense of the language. This is not about people being forced to, with something on their neck, to bow down and face up to someone. This is the language of recognizing the truth and the reality and turning around and responding in the only way they can, which is to fall down and acknowledge the truth and the reality. This is about people who will eventually realize what God has always been about, what the truth of life has always been about. And at that point, we'll only be able to fall down and acknowledge that truth. Jesus' listeners might be reminded of the story of Joseph and his brothers, which is right in the very first collection of stories in this book that we call the Bible, in a book called Genesis, where his brothers eventually realize that as they see Joseph and what he has become, they fall down at his feet. And what is it that Jesus says they will acknowledge? What is it that Jesus says they will understand? Everyone will understand eventually. It is that I, as he says, have loved you. That you are loved. That this group of Jesus followers are loved. But more than that, everyone is loved. He then offers them hope. He says, since you've held on, since you've kept my command to endure, then I will keep you from the hour of trial. So he's saying there's an escape hatch, that he's going to get them to bypass all the difficult stuff, all the snakes and the ladders, and get right to the prize at the end. Well, unfortunately, that's not what Jesus is saying. Sadly, some people have read parts of Scripture like this and thought that there is an escape hatch, that God is talking about scooping Jesus' followers out of the storm. But that's not what Jesus is saying. It's not the power of the language here. It's not the whole story. What he talks about is keeping. He says, I will keep you from the hour of trial. And here we have to lean on those who can tell us about the Greek and the Hebrew original language that this was written down in. We regularly pray a prayer that asks God, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord bless you and keep you. And the force of that word keep there that we translate in English is not escape. It's about protection. It's about shielding. It's about sheltering. What Jesus says is, I will keep you, shield you, protect you, shelter you in the storm and from the force of the trial that is living in this broken world. Because these stories recognize that this is not a fairy tale, that life is hard, and that's because this is a broken world that God is working to renew and recreate. Jesus himself, in the story of his life told by a man called John in a book we call John, says, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. Because God is acting. That's what this letter keeps coming back to. God is acting. And God is involved. And that's what Jesus means when he says, I'm coming, I'm acting soon. This is urgent. And meanwhile, hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. And again, we might imagine here this means the prize that we'll get at the end. But he's not talking about a heavy gold, jewel-encrusted crown that is of no practical use to anyone. The word is Stephanos, which is the wreath that athletes in the games in the empire were given for getting to the end of the race. Jesus reminds them that this story is not stuck, and this movement is not stuck, and that there is a hope and a future. And he says, I will make you a pillar in the temple of God. Jesus is a genius. Sometimes it's easy to forget just how clever, how sharp, how brilliant Jesus is. To talk to a group of people who are walking around a city full of new buildings and surrounded by the ruins and the pillars of temples that have fallen to the ground during earthquakes, and saying, I will make you a pillar that never again will leave in a future temple, is genius. When this story talks about the temple, it is a place of connection. It's a place where God is with his people. In other places, a man called Peter talks about Jesus' followers, God's people, becoming living stones, a holy priesthood, part of what God is doing in the world. Jesus builds on this image by saying, and you will have 3, he says, new, if you like, names, or I will give you 3 different names. I'll write the name of God, I'll write the name of a city that's coming down from where God is, and I'll give you a new name, my name. In the ancient Near East, the idea of name is about belonging, it's about identity. What God is saying is that everyone belongs to God, and that also God is at work, and the future images of a world recreated, a city rebuilt, the new Jerusalem where God will be with his people here in a place that is the way God made it to be, and God will be with his people in that place, that they will belong to that city, and they will have a new identity in Jesus' name, the identity that they were made for, to be with God, to be part of what God is doing, to belong, to be in relationship. And meanwhile, he asks them to hold on. To hold on, to know you are loved. To know that Jesus wants to keep, to protect, and to shield you, us, me, from the worst of the storm. To hold on to the story, to hold on to the hope, to hold on to the living Jesus. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it.